The conversation continues with Rosemary Chalo and Dr. Oscar Githua, looking 8 years on after Garissa University College terror attack.
So, I mean, it's interesting, even as we both having this conversation and talking about triggers, some of the things that we thought to be truth for the longest time about how we deal with trauma later on, and just some of the things that you're saying. I mean, I remember being at Westgate. I've never gone back to Westgate.
True.
I cannot go back to Westgate just because of that whole thing. And then I remember once after that, I was in a supermarket and I was doing shopping in another complex. The lights went out. I left the trolley the way it was and I left because I relived and I said, I'm not going to do this again, no matter what it is. I didn't find out, didn't ask. Could have just been power, didn't ask. So the thing is now, 8 years after that, for you, Rosemary, how are you, I guess, number one? And then how have you then been able to cope beyond the trauma, go back to school, continue with your life? How has that experience been for you?
I can say when it's come to the healing, is a process. Yeah, and if it was not for the help from our Dr. Oscar and other counseling, we could be where I am today, actually. It was a wrong experience. And to me, like, even when I was in the house, I could, like, maybe my siblings, once they knock the door, I could tense. Maybe they are coming into me. But through that, the process of psychosocial support, counseling sessions, I was unable to heal. And, like, for where I'm working now, I go to Garissa, actually, I go to Samburu, I go for those areas where there is a lot of insecurity. And I'm ill for now, but it is a journey.
Sure.
It is a journey. It can maybe, it depends also with the individual. There are some who they can take the longer period, and others they can take the short period. Yeah.
What does it mean if you don't go through the psychosocial support, if you do not, de-stress? What happens? What are we looking at then in society where we have people who've gone through a traumatic experience like this and many others and then have not gone through the process of working it out?
Okay, so fortunately, as human beings, we're pretty resilient in our own makeup, how we're created. And so if I can give you an illustration, if 100 people went through a severely traumatizing event, everybody's life will be changed, no doubt, I mean, from that day. However, in about 4 weeks, 85 people will actually go back to a semblance of normal life. They're probably going to, sleep better, they're going to avoid those places less, they're going to do all that stuff. But there's going to be 15 people, so that's about 15% of people whose lives are going to be completely, like, messed up. Now, in the event that you do not get any support, psychosocial support, that can actually be a lifelong disability. It actually will be Ndu not going to Westgate, which, by the way, we're in the same group. I actually went to Westgate once just because I had a friend come from abroad and they insisted that they were at Westgate. But then they didn't know I was involved in the recovery. They didn't know that I was already traumatized, so to speak, from it. So I had to enter it. And I remember going in there and I didn't even listen to them. I was not listening to them.
You're constantly
I was on edge the whole time. But let me mention something, because I think it's important that Kenyans, even as we're listening to the idea of how do you recover from traumatic situations, and especially from the effects of a terror attack, that until 2015, I don't think the country had, when I say the country, I mean the system, the state had not really realized the role of what psychological support would have. However, from 2016, the government, through the National Counterterrorism Center, came up with what is called the National Strategy for Countering Violent Extremism. And in one of those pillars of the strategy, there is the psychosocial pillar. And it's very important for Kenyans to know that. And that's why if you go to their website, counterterrorism.go.ke, you can actually find a hotline which you can actually call if you actually experience something like that, and you can get psychosocial support. That's very important. It was never in place back then. And you can see it's a year later. So what I'm happy about is that I've seen an incremental increase in realizing that, that you need to get psychosocial support. And culturally anyway, I don't need to belabor the point that in Kenya we never used to think counseling or psychology was important. I mean, really. For guys, have a beer, you're good.
You're
The
done.
girls are like, but you're alive, you're fine.
Yeah.
But then you're the walking dead. That's what I call people who are walking around with psychological wounds that have not been taken care of. So for the 15 people who I talked about, if those 15 people do not go through any psychosocial support, we're looking at an increase in disability in ways that you can't actually understand. So you see an increase in alcoholism at work. You start seeing the newspaper headlines. You're seeing people taking their lives via suicide. All that. Those are all
It's trauma.
It's trauma and complex trauma at that, because as Kenyans we seem to go through traumatic things every day, but we never get any support for it. Let's start from colonization. Then you come out of that, you have freedom. Now you think you're healed. You're not. You saw your parents being raped. You saw your people being castrated. You saw people being killed. You've never dealt with it as a country. We're the biggest land grabbers in the world. I always, when I've talked to people, there's no other part on earth you can go and tell people and boast to people about how many plots you have. Nowhere on earth. I can't go to New York today and tell, I have a plot in Kamulu, a plot in... Everyone's going, what are you talking about? But if you really think about it, if you think about the trauma of having your land taken away from you, it's like we're spending the rest of our time trying to claim
Get
it
it
back.
back.
At a very psychological and deep level. Kenyans won't get that. Maybe this will be played in 50 years, they'll get what I just said. But that's what we're saying, that trauma has an effect that does not look like what we think it will look like.
And it then goes beyond generations.
It's multi-generational. Eric, our online behavior as Kenyans, we're the most rabid people online. Try to joke with a Kenyan online and see what happens. They will tear you apart. And I want to say is that we have all these pent-up issues in us, which start showing us anger. They start looking at dark humor. We think we're funny, but if you really think about it from a critical aspect, we make fun of sad situations. And that's, it's a way of coping.
That's our coping
mechanism. It's our coping mechanism because we're so traumatized as a people. You hear all these things that are happening, the economy, the political situation, all those things. Kenyans feel helpless. And that's another sign of psychological, when you're so traumatized, you actually start feeling helpless. So we have this land helplessness as a society where we think, okay, another scandal, so what?
Wow.
So on this, because then we already have a premise, we already have a foundation
Yes.
of trauma that we're dealing with.
Absolutely.
Then you add on to something.
Perfect. You implode. And that's why and you'll always hear people say, oh, he used to be fine. This person was perfectly okay. They used to come to work okay. He has a family. He has 3 children. How could he do this? You just said it. The foundation was there. All that was needed was that last straw to break the camel's back. And unfortunately for us, even the way we've designed our society, it doesn't really lend us for social support. We think we're a social and communal society as Africans.
Yeah.
But I think we're holding on to dreams of our fathers. We're not. We actually are not as communal as we used to be. If you really challenge Kenyans who live in gated communities and in estates, how many of us know our neighbors and take care of our neighbors? Or if you see a kid doing something on the road, you can call them out. We're really not as communal as we think we are. We want to be. We believe we were. But I know it might be controversial to say, but I don't think we are. And that's what we need to now get back to.
We lost it.
Yeah, because that could actually help ring fence and increase that resilience. The idea that if we watch out for each other, even if an enemy or anything happens to us, as a society, we actually tend to actually get better and get out of it a bit better.
What does a forensic psychologist do?
Apart from
No,
talking,
let me ask. No. Well, the training,
Yes.
what exactly does it lean you towards? What is this thing that makes you what we refer to as a forensic psychologist?
Well, it's where psychology intersects with the criminal justice system. That's at the basic level. So all areas of the system, starting all the way from law enforcement, all the security apparatus, then going to detention, or what we call remand in Kenya, then the court system, then corrections. So if you look at the whole intersection and interplay of psychological processes in all of that, starting from the criminals and criminal minds and all that, all the way through, that's what we do, that's what we deal with.
So if you look at that and you go through the process of what brings about terrorism, what we like to refer to as radicalism, would you then say that perhaps people who are radicalized are also traumatized?
They actually, yes and no. But yes, especially for the ones who end up being activated. So, for instance, if a young person in the community gets radicalized, which happens a lot, and we know what causes them to be radicalized, it's not being told that you're going to get 5 billion shillings at the end of the day. It's actually love and support, and somebody wanting to be like an older brother to you, and they come close to you. So what happens is they sell to you this idea of a utopian society, and they tell you that you can be part of that society, and you're a valued member of that society. And once you join this society, for example, if you travel and go to another land where you're supposed to join this, let's say a caliphate or whatever it is, then when you land there, you realize that this is a bunch of criminals. And there's nothing like what they sold you. They're raping women, they're killing people for no reason, and they're putting you on the front line to go die, and they're not doing it themselves. And yet they're selling that as the ultimate price. So you end up being traumatized by that, and you go through what is called moral injury, because you thought you're going to actually do this cause, but then you get there and you find it's a completely different idea. So you get traumatized. And I also want to speak to the idea of the families of people who are radicalized. They get really traumatized. And I think when I was here in January, we were at we were right there in your sister station, and I remember we were talking about the effects of the 15th of January, the 14 Riverside attack, and the family members of some of the people. There are people now we work with and we see, and the trauma, stigma associated with them and all that is something you cannot even calculate. You cannot actually measure, because they really had no idea. If you really think about your normal family member, then your son or your daughter gets radicalized, your brother, your sister, it really changes your life, because you live with that stain the rest of your life. People will say, there's no, you didn't know, you probably even helped them, and really you're benefiting financially. How
could you not see the signs?
How could you not? And yet nobody is trained to see those signs systemically. And that's the next phase now, where we say, can we train society to understand when somebody is changing and is becoming radicalized, because our trauma is there, yes.
I mean, PTSD, one relates to it when one watches movies and one thinks of people who have been in war.
Yes.
More so American movies that deal with the Iraqi war, the Afghanistan war, and so forth. But if we bring it back home and we look at our police service,
perfect.
Okay, the way they go about their business, the way they are equipped to go about their business, or the lack or the absence of the equipment and the preparation they need to go about their business, and then the work that they're supposed to do and the work that they actually do. Does it not then fit this categorization that you've spoken of? And would one then not say that we have an entire group of people in this country who are constantly being traumatized?
I don't know, Bonamuga, if you know how profound what you've said is. We work with them and we've seen it. And I want you to imagine who a police officer or who a security officer in this country is. An 18-year-old lady or gentleman or, 20-year-old who's been deployed to serve this country and to probably even lay their life for this country. But then when they go to work, there's a lot of challenges with the work. Of course, it is the work, but no human being is trained to die and trained to, and you're not trained to see some of the things
to suffer
and to suffer. And so there are many of them in the forefronts, and I know if they're listening to it, they'll be so happy that I'm speaking on their behalf. When I say that they do a lot of good work, but yet there's a lot of support they require that a lot of times they don't have. I'm sure even Rosemary, in interacting with some of the officers she interacted with, she saw, and yet they're even a bit better because they're KDF. But if now you're talking about the police officers and stuff, they're absolutely unshielded. They're out there doing work for this country. They're not sleeping, so we can actually have safety. But then the things they see on a day-to-day basis, they actually are the walking dead. And I'm going to say that again in the sense of psychological trauma. However, I also want to commend the National Police for the things that they've put in place since about 2017, 2018, that have actually started, they have now a police hospital, I think, which they're going to be commissioning. They've also started the Directorate of Wellness, and the director is someone I know personally. I know they have a lot of counselors and psychologists who they're hiring now into the rank and file. They're also using the NPSC are actually using civilian psychologists to also help the police. So there's a few things and strides that are being made. but still there's a long way to go. And if I'm speaking about police, I also have to speak about prisons also, because they also get deployed in very difficult deployments, which Kenyans have no idea about. And that's why I was so happy when I saw Chief Justice Maraga being given a task force to actually look into their welfare. I hope that welfare and their recommendations will actually be put in place, because as a country, the idea of, you hear it everywhere, we write good documents, nobody implements them. But I hope that this is one that can be implemented, because the safety and security of this country relies on the wellness of our officers.
Kari, from a psychological perspective, as you're talking, I'm thinking about certain processes that we as Kenyans are known for. Task forces, committees, we form them very well. It's like we know, we understand, we need to look into this thing, and we do. Information gathered. Some even go to the point where they're analyzed, shelved. This we see consistently. Every time you talk of something, I can't even tell you, but that one, we even know what we need to do.
Yes.
Okay? How do we explain? Because this trauma we speak of, it isn't as though task forces upon task forces haven't talked about the wellness of the police service. They have. Correct. It isn't as though they haven't talked about reforming the prison services. They have. And yet, even with all the reports we have, and with successive governments, and then with successive political leadership, what is this thing that we keep inheriting in the political leadership and in our own personality as Kenyans that ensures we take the step of sorting out a problem, but we never sort it out? And it replicates. So it means we have a powder keg that we keep adding powder to. And somewhere along the line, I think at the back of my, we even know what will happen, but it still doesn't stop us. How do you explain a situation where you have an entire generation upon generation of people who see the abyss, they know they're heading towards it, and they keep accelerating towards it?
That's a hard one, and I think it's a systemic question. However, I also want to give examples of where it has actually worked. I was fortunate to be in the National Task Force for Mental Health that was appointed in 2019, and we did our work, collected views from Kenyans about what Kenyans require in terms of mental health and their wellness. And we came up with a report that was actually published, and it was launched in the middle of COVID. And what I want to say is that from that report, one of our key things we said when we were appointed, we said, like I said, I do not want to ever be appointed to anything in government which won't bear fruit. If the intention is to just have it as people who are just being seen there and then not actually help and serve Kenyans. So it was one of our demands from the word go. So what has happened is that from the recommendations of that task force, a lot of actually the recommendations are being actualized. A lot of the laws right now, there's a push to repeal the penal code that actually criminalizes attempted suicide in the law. That is retrogressive in any way you look at it. So we want to see, is there a way to actually have that through a parliamentary process to get it out, because it has to be repealed. You also have to think about, there's a law on counselors and psychologists that was actually effected 2014, had never been actualized, was actualized finally last year as one of our recommendations. The Mental Health Board was also formed, the Mental Health Act that actually came into being 2022, I believe. So for me, there's a lot of steps, but the one lesson I've learned is that government can move very slowly because it's a behemoth that's huge. However, it is time for us as Kenyans to start doing it. And I agree with you. It seems like a learned helplessness. It's like we do these really nice things academically, but then people don't follow up with action. And that is the problem. I think our learned helplessness, we are numb to our situation and our situation. Here we can speak all the good English we want and analyze things to a T, but the normal Kenyan outside there says, wale ni watu wa masuti. The guys...
Doctor, it's puzzling. The things we talk about and recommend can be done.
Yes.
What hamstring? I mean, they can be done.
They can.
And it's
what do you think it is, City? Is it a psychological issue?
You know,
is that why you're
I'll
heading?
pontificate on psychological issues when there's no psychologist. No. When there's a psychologist.
You will leave it at that. As we conclude, let's get back into the Garissa University. And Rosemary, so you went through the help of psychologists such as Daktari, but then I can imagine you plus your colleagues who are fellow students, some lecturers. How about your family members? Because I can imagine what they went through as they're hearing, okay, there's an attack at Garissa University. They have no clue where you are. Did they get that support?
No. Yeah, the
Should
family
they?
was not. Yeah, they should.
Can I support her? Why? And then she'll get back to it. Rosemary, sorry to cut you short, but it's important. When somebody has gone through extreme trauma, they change. And family members need to understand that. That's the reason why. In fact, how I was involved in the support for Rosemary and her schoolmates was because I happened to meet the director for DAD in the country at a conference. And then he came very proudly and he told me, oh, you know, as the Germans, we're going to give the students a scholarship for 1 year, and it's going to really help them. And I listened to him and I looked at him and I said, Doc, that's really great. First of all, I'm embarrassed that it's not the Kenyan government giving that scholarship.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. But second of all, have you considered that maybe you'll be sending zombies to class? He was completely floored. And then that's how I got in, because I said, you know, psychologically, you've got to really help them in. And that's why it's important. Rosemary and other people like her families need to be informed. What do you expect from her? How can you support her? Don't spend time around her. And I'm sure she got so many people asking, Leon and Nini, what happened?
Keeps asking those questions.
Yeah, you need to really stop all that and just be there for her as a person.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's important then that for us to understand that it's a journey, and it's not just 2 years later. So you're okay. We moved on. You moved from Garissa, you went to Moi. So
no.
It's like a continuous journey. But thank you very much, guys, for joining us today. Rosemary Chalo is a survivor of the Garissa University college attack 8 years ago. Dr. Oscar Githua is a forensic psychologist. They've been here telling us that journey of healing and what it means.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.